Well, welcome to our question and answer series for Research Like a Pro. And we are going to talk about writing up negative findings in a research report. So, this question was submitted by one of our course members, and sometimes this happens when we find that most of our research plan just comes up with negative findings. So the question is, how do I write up research with nearly all negative findings without making it sound like a travelogue? And that's a great question. Travelogue is when you say, well, I searched here and then I searched there and I searched here and I searched there. But honestly, this is a research report that we're talking about. And so it might end up being a little bit of that when you have negative findings. But we're going to go through it and we're going to get some ideas for this. So let's define a couple of things. When do negative findings turn into negative evidence? So, negative findings is when you are doing a search for a person in a certain record and they are not found. This happens in genealogy. But negative evidence is when you bring together multiple pieces of evidence to prove a conclusion. So each one of those findings is giving you a little piece of information. And when you have enough pieces of that information, you can start putting together a case for negative evidence. But you do have to do your due diligence. So we're going to look at this case, and the study group member has given me permission to show the research and, see what we all think. So let's take a look at the objective. The objective of this research project is to discover the date, place of death, and burial location of Eliza Lamberson Poling. Eliza was born about 1818 and married Zephaniah Poling in Monmouth County, New Jersey on 30 October 1833. The couple moved to Ohio by 1850 and settled in Wood County by the mid-1860s. In 1893, Zephaniah returned to New Jersey without Eliza when he died in Monmouth County, New Jersey. In 1895, his death record identified him as a widower. So let's take a look and see where Eliza was through those years and what the research showed. Here is the first record that they appear in a census together where she's actually named 1850. And at this point, they're in Huron County, Ohio. The family was mostly born in New Jersey, and we can see that Thomas here was the first child born in Ohio. So they likely migrated west between 1844 and 1847. So it's always nice in censuses when we get a little clue to migration, but we can see that they lived in New Jersey a good long time. So background information is really important. And in the Research Like a Pro process, after we write an objective, then we go back and we look at all the records that we previously had found on the couple or the family or the ancestor, and we write up a good solid piece of background information. And that helps us to see what we have and to know what we need to do going forward. Helps us get everything settled in our mind. And so we're going to look at some of the background information that was written. And so we have this little paragraph here. By the 1860s, the couple had settled in Weston, Wood County, Ohio, with their growing family, where Zephaniah bought land. And here is the deed, and here's the citation to that. It's on Family Search. So you'll notice that they have moved from their 1850 location in Huron County, and now they are in Wood County. And I think that, or let's see. So now I did do that wrong there. Sorry about that. But in 1870, they are in Weston in Wood County, Ohio, and they're still born in New Jersey. And here are some of the younger children born in Ohio still in the family. Now, in 1872, things start to get a little interesting, and Eliza petitioned for alimony from Zephaniah, who had returned home to New Jersey without her. She petitioned the court for and was granted the land Zephaniah bought in 1866 in Weston, that deed that we just barely saw. And so this was a record found at the county, on the county level, but there was also a newspaper notice put in the Wood County Sentinel, a legal notice talking about Zephaniah Poling of Keyport, Monmouth, state of New Jersey, and going on and talking about this case. Now, the 1880 census, we see that Zephaniah has come back to Ohio and the couple are enumerated there together. And so this point, we don't have any children, but we have a grandson who is living in the household. And they are both getting older. Zephaniah is 73, Eliza is 64. Now, in 1881, we have another court record. And Eliza had money issues and defaulted on the loan for the land. And then she sued her mortgager. This suit was settled in 1881, but Eliza was unable to make the trip to the Bowling Green courthouse from Weston. And here's a very interesting fact, and the reason why we want to look for court records. Some of these have such good genealogical information. Her physician wrote a note stating that she had typhoid fever and was still recovering. Eliza lost the suit and the land was sold through a sheriff's sale. So this gives us our clue that she was suffering from typhoid and she was still recovering. And if we don't know much about typhoid and that illness, this could be an avenue for adding some research to discover, what was the treatment for typhoid in the 1880s? What was the survival rate? Was there an epidemic going on in the area? Where could she have contracted the disease? Were there other people in the area that had it? This gives us a whole new view on what's going on here. So the last mention we have of Eliza is when she and Zephaniah executed a quitclaim dower release to Andrew J. Munn on 17 March 1881. And this was for that property she had lost due to the non-payment of a mortgage in Wood County, Ohio. And then Zephaniah returns to Monmouth County, New Jersey with his daughter in 1893, and he dies there in 1895 and is recorded as a widower. So we have between 1881 and 1895 a span of about 14 years where Eliza could have died. So notice 1881 is when she's got typhoid. How long could she have lived with typhoid before Zephaniah is being reported as a widower? And why did he go back to New Jersey with his daughter? Had she already died by then? Well, in the study group, and it's part of the Research Like a Pro process, we formulate a hypothesis based on all of that previous research that we just went through. And so this is what was hypothesized. Eliza Lamberson Poling died in late 1892 or early 1893 in or near Weston, Wood County, Ohio. Because her sons Andrew J., who died in 1865, and George A. died in 1866, are buried in Weston, she was likely interred in the same cemetery, which is Old Weston. The timing fits her last confirmed appearance in March 1881, her absence when Zephaniah left Weston in March 1893, and his being recorded as a widower in 1895. So this is a really good hypothesis. We've got these two sons who died young before their mother. And, if the family has buried them in Old Weston, it makes sense that perhaps she would have been buried there as well. And the date, it could be earlier than that. It's something that we also want to keep in mind because who knows how early or how late she actually died in that span of 14 years. So the next step is to come up with a good prioritized research strategy. And how do we find the records that could possibly give us an answer? Well, the step that we didn't show here is the locality guide process, where we look for a certain locality. In this case, it would be Wood County, and see what are all the records that could possibly help with this and put all those together in a guide. So this strategy is excellent. And I love how this objective was pretty narrow because that really enables us to get very specific with the strategy. So search cemeteries. And as in any county, it looks like there are several counties in Weston. There's the Old Weston Cemetery, Pottertown Cemetery. And I like this note in this research plan that this will involve calling the cemeteries as online records are either incomplete or don't exist. And that is such a good thought because we wish that all cemeteries were completely abstracted and available online, but that just simply is not the case. So we have to do some calling or on-site research ourselves. And then we have an obituary lookup through the Genealogy Society, death records that are not online for Wood County Probate Court and BGSU, and then infirmary records. So some different places to look at their records there, and also go to the Prince William County Library. Search church records at BGSU or Bowling Green State University, and search Bible records, and then revisit checking online death registers. I love this inclusion of rechecking because sometimes we feel like we've already looked at a source, but if we haven't recorded it and given it a positive or a negative notation in our research log, we're missing out because we really need to make sure we're stating if it's negative, why it's negative, and to make sure that that's noted so we don't forget. Also, things could pop up again. So this is a great research strategy. Let's take a look at what was found. So a positive was that I found her in the infirmary in January 1886. And the last record I had was 1881. This is when she came down with typhoid. And in this case, she had paralysis. So I believe she had a stroke. So we have something a little sooner than our hypothesis thought. And this often happens. Our hypothesis is just a hypothesis, and it's the research that tells us more. And then I found that her husband bought a cemetery, or her son bought a cemetery plot deed in December of 1887 for 6 spaces together. So this date coming right after 1886 is telling. Guessing that she couldn't have lived in harsh Ohio winters for more than 2 years, I'm hypothesizing she died between January 1886, when she went to the infirmary and asked for relief, and spring 1888, just after her son bought the cemetery plot. Well, that's an excellent idea. That is, it's a good hypothesis to continue to explore and think about. So here's a screenshot of the 1886 infirmary. You can see what the entire book looked like here. We can enlarge that just a little bit. And you can see that it gives the name of the person and their age, place of birth, and additional information and some remarks. And we've got Elizabeth here at the bottom with her age, which lets us know this is the correct Elizabeth, 68, born in New Jersey, admitted on January 11th, and that she's from Weston. So we've got all these identifiers that are good. And then it's a general debility. So it's always interesting to see what different things are called back in the day, and we can look that up and see that what that meant then. And here's a little bit of a enlargement of her name there. So now more research results. So I'm still waiting on information from the cemetery, but I don't expect they have more than the deed they already provided to me. So often in our research, when we're working with on-site repositories or things like cemeteries, it's kind of a waiting game. And I like how this was first in the research plan to give some time for someone to go look through the records and help out a little bit. The only other thing I have is that her children were all buying and selling land plats across from the cemetery at this time. And by fall 1888, they are all gone. So those children have sold the land only to return a few years later. Interesting. So if she, Eliza, received relief aid in January 1887, the family bought land so she could live out her days. Then they sold it when she died and buried her in the cemetery plot they bought. So that's another good hypothesis. We're starting to put together pieces of the story that could pan out. It lines up, but it's all indirect or circumstantial. No church records, although her kids were all members of a local Methodist church. No death registration, probate, nothing. Many negative searches. So we've seen that there were some positive searches here with the infirmary and the cemetery deeds, but then a lot of other negative. So how do you put those negative findings in your research log? And so we're going to just look at a few screenshots of the negative findings to give you some ideas. And I loved how this is an Airtable base, and I love how this field was added, negative search or findings. And it's just a checkbox. So if it's negative, it's right there. And what this enables you to do is then to just group by those if you want to see all the negatives, or just have a clear visual of what was not there. So you'll notice that we've got a negative source citation here, which is what we want to have. If we're going to write this up, we need to have a source citation that states negative results. So negative results for Elizabeth polling and name variations. And then we have the database and we have specific. And I love that in the results column, we learned that these were negative results, but we searched page by page in the Cleveland death registries. So this is additional information, and it's so important to note that, because if you don't note that, then maybe someone wouldn't realize or you wouldn't remember you had done that. So that could even be in your citation if you're writing this up for a final proof, where you wouldn't, be discussing your search. You would just have it in the citation. So the comment, she likely didn't die in Cleveland, no record of her or any name variation. And then we have county death records and negative findings, death registration in center. And an interesting thought here, it appears that 88 is missing. So when we notice that there's something in the record collection where our ancestor could have been and those records are missing, that might give us a really good clue that perhaps she should have been there, but she's not. And so this could become good negative evidence, all of this together. And we just have to look and examine everything. So more negative findings in death registration for the probate court. And this was a phone call to see if, maybe there's something that they have on site that's not online, which is also another really good step. Negative results for Zephaniah to see if there was some relief for him. And he should have had intake papers, going after the spouse to see if perhaps mentioned there would say he'd been widowed since whatever year that she might have died. So we always want to make sure we are researching all of the associates, all the family members, to see what could be there. And then another negative search for her just for a death certificate. And name variations, good to note. She's not found. Unlikely she died since she was ill in Wood County. And remember that Zephaniah had gone back to New Jersey. But again, this is good exhaustive search to see if possibly she was able to travel back and had died there. But the comment helps us remember that she probably didn't die out in New Jersey because she was paralyzed and she was too weak to travel in Wood County. Makes it seem less likely she would have gone back to New Jersey. And then we have another negative search, wondering if she had a discharge. And this one, again, was an on-site request to see if there were records. And there was a discharge ledger book, but Eliza was not found there with any of her children. So another good research opportunity. And it's okay if it's negative. You've done the research. And then another request to see if she was at a pauper's grave. And again, this was through the museum there. And then I'm looking for an obituary at the Ohio Wood County chapter of Ohio Genealogical Society. So you can see lots of really good research into some unique record types and some unique on-site searches that we could do. And I love that this wasn't just, well, she's not in a death certificates or, online research, but really digging deeper. So, what do you do about writing that up? How do you bring it all together? It certainly looks very probable that Eliza did happen, just as, we've kind of looked through the hypothesis and what the records tell us. But when you're writing up your research, the very first step is to just write what you found. And I think too often we perhaps get caught up in trying to write this great proof summary of how it all comes together without just getting everything put into a research report. So I like to write the report first and then see what that tells me. So let's go through how we would do that. So the objective's already written, the background information is written, and this should be, everything that we knew before the research began. And then we can start talking about what we actually found. And I think in a situation like this, where all the research took place in pretty much one geographical location, except for that New Jersey search, that it could just be, by record type. And sometimes we organize by locality, or we maybe organize chronologically. This all took place in a relatively short amount of time. So in my mind, this makes sense to group it by record type and just going through the record types. So you might feel like this is a bit of the travelogue. I searched here and I searched there, but I think there's some things we can do to mitigate that and make this a really robust research report that could then lead to writing a proof summary. So we could just group this by the actual research plan. This was the order of the research plan. If you wanted to talk about something else, if you wanted to reorder this, you certainly could. But I would start just writing about what was found in each one of these. And then you can organize it. You can cut and paste and, try to make it a little bit, that it flows better if you decide to. But I would just get started by writing a little bit about each one of those searches. So what do you write when it is a negative result? So I think that it's really helpful because remember, you're writing this pretty much for yourself. You could be sharing it with other people, but this isn't necessarily your finished product. This is just helping you to understand your research and get it down. If you were writing for a client, it would be to have the client understand what was found. So you would state the reason for the search, and then you simply provide the results, whether it was positive or negative. And then you can add your analysis. And if you've done a pretty good job of writing in the research log, then you could take what you wrote and either revise it a bit or just add it if you wrote a pretty good several sentences or paragraph. So here's just an example that I took a little bit from the research log and added a little bit of my own ideas here about how I would write up one of those pieces. So death records of Weston Wood County could list Eliza's death. As her last place of residence, she likely died in this location. However, no listing for Eliza was found in the death registration, despite searching page by page. Studying the death register, it appears that 1888 is missing, but some of the records are not in order, and the county changed how it recorded death entries from date order to township order, or under the letter of the surname for a span of years. Eliza's death may have been missed in the recording. So I added this little bit here at the end, and I added this little bit at the beginning, but this middle part was all straight from the research log. So it's really good to note that in your log that that's what was going on. And often this is a piece of evidence. This bit that there is a very key date is missing could tell us, yeah, that's when she died because she should have been there. We know she was there. She was ill, she was, this is so likely that that is a good time that she, I shouldn't say a good date, but it is a likely date. And because it's missing, that can become part of our negative evidence. Now, when do you bring all of this together? Well, in a research report, you can bring together the findings in the conclusion. And that's when you can say, well, this was all negative, but because she was admitted to the infirmary and some of the pages for that year are missing, or whatever, you bring together what you think really happened. And we always want to use our qualifiers, especially in this case, because there are still some searches in the church and the cemetery where those are still pending. So we are trying to get reasonably exhaustive research to be able to say with some good certainty that this is what happened to Eliza. And we need to make sure we have covered all of our bases and have all that research done. And usually by the time you've written this out, you do have ideas of a few more things you could do. And so you would add those future research ideas to your report, and then you would continue working on those until you feel like you have enough to write your proof. So this in-between step between the negative research and then writing your proof summary is really important because it just helps you get everything down, helps you organize your thoughts. And then when you actually want to go and write a proof summary, and in this case, this probably wouldn't need to be, that long. I would imagine this could be written up in a couple of pages. And you could put a lot of information just in the footnotes, maybe even just one page. But when you feel like you have really done that reasonably exhaustive research, which is what we need for proof, and remember, it's all the possible records, the things for this specific research question about her death. When we feel like that's completed, then we can write. And we use that report as a basis to correlate the evidence. That's given us that good foundation. And then we can put in all the direct and negative. And correlation is so important when we're writing proof, where we just state. And in this case, if you're writing this proof summary, you wouldn't go into a huge amount of detail. Like you wouldn't probably say because cemetery, obviously she could have been buried in a cemetery. So contacting all the cemeteries could lead to a record. You wouldn't put that into the proof summary. You'd put something more simple into a footnote. So you would say, she is not listed in any cemetery in the county, although this was the basic location. And then your footnote would have the source citations for, negative search in this cemetery, negative search in this cemetery. And that's where you would include all those details about where you actually searched. You can take that out of the narrative. And you would cite all your searches with, your source citations. And you definitely put your negative searches in there, your negative findings in your citations. And then if there's anything that seems to come up as a conflict, you would have to resolve that. I didn't really see anything that is a conflict in this case. It seems like it's pretty straightforward. But I would definitely just get it written up as a research report at this point. And then when you feel like you've really done your due diligence with the research, it could become the proof summary. So hopefully going through that little case study about a pretty focused objective and what the evidence is showing us helps us to see how all of our research can come together with eventually, hopefully, being able to prove something about our ancestor, whether we found positive or negative findings. It can come together and end up that negative evidence proving something. So thank you and good luck with your research and writing.